Welcome to the show, Evil Saint. Thanks for coming here.
Yeah, I'm really honored to be a guest on this podcast.
Evil it's an absolute honor to have you on the podcast. Both me and Nishmit are a regular reader of your Telegram channel, and we follow a lot of things you say, and it's interesting to read your stuff on Telegram also. I remember when I first followed you, I chuckled a bit because of your username, Evil Saint. I think it's the greatest oxymoron of all the time. Evil Saint. Saint is someone who is virtuous and ethical and moral, and evil is someone who is not.
Yeah, I actually chose the name because I believe that life is like an oxymoron. It's more like a stable paradox, not exactly a one-way road. You can't say you're just good because there are times when you need to be evil as well. Not evil for the sake of being evil, but because it's necessary, And sometimes you have to be good. Not because you want to be good, but because being good is the productive thing to do. So I thought that putting those two very different perspectives together is what makes a whole. More like the yin and yang.
Well, I personally love your Telegram channel. I've been recommending it to everyone. And recently, while we are recording, you just have announced a new book, The Manipulator's Bible. Can you tell us something about it? And most importantly, you said it's a free product. So what's the thinking behind this?
Oh, well, I thought that, since I've been making a lot of posts and especially the Machiavellian maxims, a lot of the followers in the Telegram channel love that particular series, the Machiavellian Maxims. It talks about manipulation, which is like the central theme of the Telegram channel. I talk about other things too, but I'm mostly focused on manipulation. And the reason for this is because I believe in life, if you're not manipulating, you're getting manipulated. So, I mean, even when people don't mean to manipulate you, they might just end up manipulating you, emotionally, sometimes logically, sometimes unconsciously. Women do it, your family does it, your friends will do it. I mean, nearly everybody will manipulate you for their own personal gain, whether they want to or they don't. Maybe it's premeditated or it's instantaneous. So it's very advantageous for you to know when these things are happening so that you can protect yourself from being manipulated, to understand what is happening, like the social dynamics that is happening between you and the person you're interacting with, whether you're about to make a concession that you shouldn't, whether you should take a different route from the one that you're planning to take. And I noticed that a lot of people love the Machiavellian Maxims, so I was like, okay, I will compile these things. Of course, I will take my time to go into detail about most of the things I've written and explain step by step how you can protect yourself from being manipulated, as well as how you can manipulate others. That's if you want to. I don't really endorse like going about manipulating people, but if you want to, it's fine. I'm not really against it because it's what I talk about all the time, so I can't really be against it. So I wanted to make like a more condensed, material that someone can read at a go and understand the basics, the most important things that you should know when dealing with these things. You can always extrapolate into the situation, and it'll be beneficial for you. And I was like, I don't want to sell this because the Telegram channel is not a paid group or anything. It's where I come to share some of the things I learned and some of my experiences. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make it free, and if anybody wants to pay for it, it's fine. You can always pay for it, or you can pay $0 for it. It's all fine, but it's available for you. And I've been extremely busy, so I was like, okay, I want to see the amount of interest on this particular product. If people really want it, then I will create time for it. And I said if they made 50 comments saying yes, I would go ahead and do it in the next 14 days. And I think we're about to hit 50. So people really want it. which means that it's definitely gonna come out in the next 14 days.
At this very moment, we are at 49. So by the time this podcast will be released, I think a book will be completed.
Yeah, it's already, everything that I need for it. It's already like bubbling in my head. I need to just put it down and start arranging everything. So I've started planning the time I'm going to use to create it, and I think maybe in a week or so it'll be available for everybody to get, and I think a lot of people will find it beneficial. So it really makes me happy when young men and women, like, they arm themselves against these. The world is a very dangerous place, and you need to arm yourself against these external forces that are trying to use you for their own personal gain. You should be able to protect yourself as well as do things for your own personal gain, to be able to advance whatever course it is that you're on.
Yeah, the word manipulation gets a lot of bad connotation. Like whenever I or we talk about manipulation, and when we say that you can use it for good, a majority of people will disagree, that saying that manipulation is a very bad thing, and it always gets a bad connotation. Manipulation is always bad. Is there another way we can convince people, or is it always a manipulation that is a tool we can use to convince people?
Well, even from a young age, I had this intuitive understanding that manipulation is not really bad. It depends on how you frame it. Like, if I told a kid that if he didn't read his books per se, and these books were very useful for him, if I told him that if you don't read these books, the big bad wolf is gonna come and eat you at night, he's gonna be scared and he'll definitely read those books. Of course, I've manipulated him because I told him something that is not true, and believing what I said, he did something that would help him. The methods I use are not direct methods, they're not sincere, they are manipulative, but the end results are actually beneficial to the person that I impose these methods on. So that is how you measure manipulation. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're trying to get something from someone or use somebody. You could use it to help someone. You could tell someone that if you watch porn, your brain is going to shrink. We know that technically that is not correct, but it's a very good way of getting people to stop a destructive habit, something that is definitely not helping them and is rather pulling them backwards. It's manipulative, but it's for the greater good. Now, the reason why most people think that manipulation is evil is because most manipulators are very selfish people who use it for their own gain. They are not really concerned about you. They do it for themselves. They do it to gain something from you or to get you to do something that is going to benefit them rather than you or anybody else. And that is why people have, they have this negative connotation of the word manipulation. And it's really fine, because most people, the people that actually have this connotation are not people that are interested in the manipulation or the social dynamics or anything. They are people that just have opinions, and if you even bother to spend maybe, let's say, 5 minutes, checking into what these things are, you would have a much different opinion than this manipulation is evil thing. So if someone considers manipulation an evil thing, I don't think you should try to even convince him, because you already know the kind of person he is. A simple person, a simple-minded person who has an opinion on something that they have definitely not, checked one or two to see what it's all about.
Yeah, manipulation is a very interesting topic when you look at it this way. Like, there are bad manipulation, there are good manipulation. For good manipulation, for example, if someone's struggling with a habit and you talk someone out, you manipulate them to get rid of that habit, it's a good manipulation. It's for the well-being of a person. As for bad manipulation, the most common example, what's happening with the COVID situation, what government is doing with people, that's bad manipulation. Also, what I've observed is people who study manipulation, majorly, these people don't study manipulation to, manipulate others. They study manipulation to stay safe, to secure themselves, to avoid themselves from getting manipulated.
Yes, that is exactly why I opened this Telegram channel. I'm not really trying to get people to start manipulating others, but it's more like having a weapon. If you have a weapon, you can protect yourself. You can also use it aggressively to attack, right? But most importantly, you can protect yourself with it. And that is what matters the most. For instance, I don't think there's a way for you to manipulate the government concerning the COVID situation. You can't really manipulate the government, but you need to have the manipulative weapons to understand that, okay, they're trying to manipulate you into these things. They're trying to coerce you, into doing certain things that you shouldn't be doing. For instance, they said that they wrote explicitly on the COVID vending machines or whatever. They said these the mask vending machines, not the COVID vending machines. They said these masks do not protect you against COVID, right? And then they said that everybody should wear a mask. So why do we need to wear a mask when these things don't protect us from COVID? And then they said we should double mask. And then they said, hey, how about you triple mask? It makes no sense, but people have been brainwashed to the point that they just follow whatever the government says, and they think, okay, it's for my own good because the government has told them that we're doing this for your own good. And this is very deep. It's not something that is like as shallow as most people think it is. It's very deep-rooted manipulative techniques that the government has used on certain people. And of course, just like the Black Lives Matter movement, people's need to belong to a particular faction that they consider the outliers of those that they consider weird. Like, if I accept the jab, like to get the COVID vaccine, then I am an outlier from those who think that they're special and are refusing to take the COVID jab. It's the same thing as people supporting Black Lives Matter. You see white people supporting Black Lives Matter. What exactly are they doing? They want to belong to a group that they consider like an outlier from the regular white people group. Because I don't see the point of white people supporting Black Lives Matter. So the ones that do want to belong to a group that they consider an outlier, and that is what the movement uses against them. It uses that need to belong to a particular group that is somehow special for being different from what is supposed to be the norm. That is the manipulative technique they use against these people. And then these people, they are even more dedicated to the Black Lives Matter movement, even more dedicated to the COVID movement than the government, than the originators of the particular movement. That is a very strong manipulative technique, and something like in this book, Orwell's 1984. If you read that book, you'll see a lot of these things in there.
Yeah. On a more primitive context, this thing that you said about people's need to feel included or belonged to a certain way of thinking, that is the mainstreamed way of thinking. This is generally linked to women's psychology. And what we are seeing right now is not limited to them. It really fascinates me how people can't think for themselves. We really lack critical independent thinkers. And in my opinion, this is what makes them so vulnerable to such manipulations. What do you think are the insecurities that are triggered that lead people to get manipulated on such a mass scale where everything is pretty much scrutinized? We all know governments don't have our best interests in their mind, yet the majority believes them.
The real problem is not that everything is out there in the open. The problem is, just like you said, we lack critical, independent thinkers. If you asked somebody, like let's say your average Joe, you asked him, why is this and why is X, Y, Z the way it is? Their ability to provide a coherent reason or an explanation for this thing determines which faction they're going to join. Now, people who don't want to think want the government to do the thinking for them. And why is that so? Because the government holds the most power, of course. It's just like think about it like this. They are like children, right? If let's say John has a father and he also has a brother, right? If John's brother and his father were having an argument, John would by default support his father. That is just the way things are. Why? Because he believes that his father has more authority in the house, of course. His father provides for the house, he takes care of the house. He has more authority. Even though his brother might be right, John will by default support his father because he believes his father has the most chances of winning. And he believes that if he were to identify with his father, he would seem more legitimate than identifying with the minority, or what you might call the outlier, like the weirdo. My brother is arguing with my father. How can I support my brother? You understand? It's funny in a way. So people who don't want to think, by default, support the government because they don't want to think about what is happening. The government wants to keep us safe, so let's just support the government. Don't make this any more difficult than it is. Just take the jab. They said it's, whatever. Stay indoors. It's just a couple of months. Wear the mask. It's not really a big inconvenience or anything. They don't really want to think about what is happening. They just want to get through it because it's stressing them out. It's making them think, and they hate doing that. So they just follow the government. Because if you decide to follow those who are saying, no, we don't want to take the vaccine, no, we don't want to wear masks, then you are forced to think. What is happening here? You have to think. Nobody's going to think for you. You have to think, because you can't support this cause without having your own coherent reasons. If someone were to ask you, so why are you doing this? You can't reference anybody. You can't reference any articles online. You can't reference any newspapers. You have to think for yourself, and you have to give your own reasons as to why. And this is what people hate doing. They just want to see things, support them, and not have to defend their position. This is why by default, majority of people are supporting the government, saying that let's just take the vaccine. It's not a big of a deal. You're not going to die. It reduces the chances of you getting COVID. It protects you from people who have COVID, or it protects others who don't have COVID if you might have COVID. Wear the mask. It's not a big inconvenience. It's not like you can't breathe or anything. They just don't want to think. It's very, very simple if you understand this. They don't want to think, so they go with the side that requires the least amount of thinking, so that they can just support something and then, cry outrage when someone goes against their own opinions or what they're supporting, because it stresses them out, and they want simple things. They don't want to be responsible for themselves. They don't want to be responsible for anything. They just want to follow a leader and then, probably get to a safe haven. But that's all a lie. And in the end, they just end up being stupid, because if you don't want to think, you're going to follow someone who's probably misleading you, and that is the utmost level of stupidity. You're following someone and you don't even know where you're following them to. Perhaps they don't even have your best interest at heart, which we have already seen with the government. They don't have our best interest at heart. That is exactly what is happening with the majority of people who are supporting the government in this COVID movement.
Wow, this was wonderfully explained, that where this thing originates, people don't really want to think for themselves, and they'll side with the side where they need to think the least. This really makes a lot of sense, and historically, anyone who has read a little bit of history, they know whenever such situations occur where government or the ruling institution, they force people to live in a certain way, where this thing ends up. This always, without exception, ends up in a fascist authoritarian regime. It's funny how 1984 went from a fictional novel to a government's handbook. Won't be long until they normalize war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength.
The most common one is you post something online, maybe an opinion of yours, and then some dude or some woman who should probably not be online just comes up and is like, what's your source? I mean, that is probably the most thoughtless thing to ask someone, your source. What do you mean by asking someone? You're asking someone to give you a source. Why does the person need to give you a source? That source that you're asking for is also a human being who thought about this thing, right, and explained it, and you want someone to reference a source. It's just you admitting that you don't believe you have the ability to think for yourself and come to cogent reasons for things happening, or maybe form coherent thoughts. So you need someone to do that thinking for you. So therefore you believe that everybody else needs another person to do that thinking for them. So if someone should post something, they should have a source. Because you need a source. It's more like self-projection. And you see a lot of people doing it these days. What's your source? Where did you get this from? What article did you read this from? Who said this? It can't be you, because I definitely can't think for myself, so you definitely shouldn't think for yourself as well. It's just very funny.
Whenever someone asks me for source, my default response is God told me. Okay, so yeah, you will say you also have a consultancy service, right? You've mentioned it a couple of times on your Telegram channel as well. Can you tell us something about it?
Okay, yes, the consultancy service. I actually just get on a call with people, and what we do is we talk about what the person wants to improve. It could be anything, but basically the things that I talk about on my Telegram channel, and not really my tweets, because I don't really do consultancy based on my tweet topics. I can tweet on a variety of topics, so I focus mainly on what I talk about in the Telegram channel. It could be about women. I've had a lifelong interest in learning about women and how they behave and why they do what they do. I've even made 2 threads, one about men and another about women, and those went viral. So if a person wants to talk about women, then I'll dedicate a certain amount of my time to them, for a fee, of course, so we can talk about those things, and probably he'd tell me what is happening with him, and I'd give him advice on what I think he should improve on. Or we could talk about business. If you want to improve your business, and you tell me about what you do, and I'll give you my own opinions, not professional, but my own opinions on how you can improve that business, and probably the next steps you should be thinking about. We could talk about manipulation. We could talk about psychology, social dynamics, how people behave, and you tell me about events, and I try to explain those things to you and try to give you instances and how you can, or how you could have gone through these things much more effectively and better. We could talk about productivity, which is the main topic of my book. I'm obsessed with productivity. I used to work 15 hours when I was in the cafe. That was like some 5 years ago, before I left. I used to work 15 hours a day. I was sleeping 4 hours a day, sometimes 3. It was really like it was an intoxicating period of my life. I loved it, and always trying to recreate that moment or even surpass it. So there are a variety of things we can talk about, and you can always pick what you want to talk about. You can talk about more than one thing, and I've heard a lot of good reviews, of course, from people who have participated in the consultancy service. And I try to be very modest. I don't charge a lot, because I know that most of the people who want these services might be students. Some are business people who can afford to pay, but there are students who I don't want to charge a lot, because this knowledge would be useful to them, and I don't want payment to be a barrier. But of course, that opportunity cost is also there, so I can't just give away my time for nothing. And it's been going really great. I've gotten a bunch of people who participate in the consultancy service. Usually I take like 5 people at a go, but this time I didn't specify how many people I'm taking, so it's going great.
So glad to hear that. You're really helping a lot of people, not just by consultancy, but even all your insights. You're one such person that we can talk about literally anything from you, and you'll have some great insights. I remember once speaking to you on Twitter Spaces about semen retention. I didn't expect, but you still had some deep insights on this. Also, most importantly, just like you said, productivity. I can't say I'm obsessed with it. I try to be productive. I try to be as efficient as I can. Sometimes I fail, sometimes I pass. Once I reached out to you a few months ago about some scheduling problem. You recommended me a habit of using stopwatch to measure the times that I'm putting in my activities, and that helped a lot. Really, really thankful for that.
The stopwatch technique is actually something I learned like a while ago. It helps a lot because you can keep an exact track of how much time you're spending on a particular activity. For instance, if you want to go bathe, you start your stopwatch, you get in the bathroom, when you come out to stop it, and you see exactly how long it took in the bathroom. Now, the reason for this is so that you know whether you do things slowly or you do things fast. Let's say you have 1 hour to do a particular project. If you start your stopwatch when you start the project and you stop your stopwatch when you stop the project, you can see that perhaps you didn't spend exactly 1 hour. You might have spent 1 hour 30 minutes. So you ask yourself, what was I doing the rest of the 30 minutes on this project? Was I working the entire time, or was I distracted most of the time? And once you understand that, okay, I might have been distracted for like 30 minutes, then you understand that, okay, you've just wasted 30 minutes on something you should have used 1 hour for. What distracted me? Was it my phone? If it was your phone, then you know that definitely you cannot like work on a project with your phone next to you next time. So you know that for a fact because you have checked the numbers and they have clarified it for you. You don't even have to like use your intuition or maybe guess or maybe just, you know for a fact that you've spent 30 extra minutes on something you were supposed to spend only 1 hour on. So you know that next time your phone should be away from you. It's not even something that you have to like think about. It's a fact. If you use this technique for almost everything you do, not everything though, but almost everything you do that requires productivity, then it becomes much easier for you to keep track of the things that waste your time in the day and the things that you should focus more attention on, and how you can like tunnel vision. You just focus on one activity. When you get it done, then you move on to the next activity. That's how you get things done in a day. You can do like maybe 20 things in a day, but if you're distracted, you might only be able to achieve like 15 of those things that you wanted to achieve in the day. And that is a big difference, because if you take like 15 things instead of 20, in 1 week you're going to have 5 multiplied by 7 things that you're supposed to do. That's like 35 things that you didn't do in a week that you could have gotten done. Imagine doing like 35 things in a week and someone who didn't do 35 things in a week. That's a huge difference. So getting that much done within the span of that period, it's gonna put you like in a much farther distance than those that are not doing it exactly like that.
So I think the reason that the stopwatch method works is, like you just said it very clearly, you are not depending on abstract thinking that, okay, I might have spent the time required, 1 hour or something. You have something solid. You have an exact time which you can introspect on later. And most of the productivity gurus, whenever you go to them for productivity tips, they recommend to keep a checklist or a task list. Do you think that helps?
Well, I do have a task list on my as part of the product. It's like a tracking list for the things you want to do in a day. You don't have to use it exactly, but you could put like the most important things that you wanted to do in a day on it, and then tick them off as you go. I highly recommend, even if you're not going to use that, you should definitely use a to-do list. It's very important. You keep track of the things that are very important in the day that you need to get done on that day. And then when you do it, you tick it off. And there's always this feeling of, it's like momentum building. When you tick off something from your to-do list and you tick off another thing, there's this momentum building. You don't want to stop. You want to get to the end. You want to tick off everything on your to-do list. But if you don't have a to-do list, it's possible that you do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you stop there when you have like 10 things to do in a day. So a to-do list is very important. And the stopwatch just complements it by giving you an idea, like an exact idea of how much time you're spending on a certain activity and how much time you're supposed to spend on that activity. I don't mostly like use it, but because I've already it's ingrained in me. When I want to do something, I just tap my stopwatch and just check. It's also fun because I get to see, can I do this thing faster? I did it in so amount of time yesterday. Can I do it faster? I'm obsessed with like doing things very, very quickly. So I want to beat my previous record to do this thing faster, and not just faster, but more efficiently. Like, can I do this thing better, but even faster than I did it yesterday? And when you do that, it gets more fun. The activities aren't that boring. You're trying to beat time, and you're trying to also beat your, quality record from the previous day, or whenever was the last time you did it. And it gets it gets fun. It's not just about, some boring activity that you have to do and then just get done with.
Yeah, this is very true, because you're bringing a competitive aspect in your daily routine. So it makes it like a game. You kind of wait your high score. Yeah, this is very actionable, I think. I'll be implementing it definitely. And what worked best for me was I use this app called Google Calendar. So everyone has a task list. I do have a task list, but I give every task a specific time. So it's a calendar that has my task in designated times. So that works very well for me, because it's like achieving targets. I have an interesting topic to talk about.
All right.
I've heard Illimitable Man talk about modafinil for monk mode. Have you ever used modafinil for productivity?
No, I have not used modafinil for productivity, but I can't tell you that I have not used drugs to increase productivity. I'm not a perpetual drug user per se, but I'm not totally against the use of drugs. For instance, if you were to use this one, it's a very popular drug, LSD. It's a very popular drug that it's also very expensive. You don't just take it, you have to microdose it. Now, these drugs are not just used for you to do things faster, but I said in a tweet, I think yesterday or the day before, that if you are competing with someone that is using drugs to expand their way of thinking from one-dimensional to 2-3-dimensional, how do you expect to win? That is a very big question, because you don't expect to win against me when I'm using drugs to enhance my method of thinking. I'm not just thinking in one-dimensional. I'm not thinking in just the practical aspect, but I'm thinking in psychological, pathological, sense of the word. Anticlimacus made a thread on the different ways of thinking, and it was very interesting. I spoke to him about it once, and he told me that there are different ways of thinking. There are like the pathological thought, there is psychological thought, and I think there's a third one also. So using drugs expands consciousness and the routes in which a person thinks. It can increase the amount of, let's say, tributaries in which you're thinking. You're not just thinking in one direction, but probably 2-3 directions. And that is what gives people an edge against those who don't use drugs. And believe me or not, those who are in the higher ups, those people that you consider the elites, they use drugs to enhance their thinking. So people who are against the use of drugs to enhance thinking, I don't really know how they want to compete with those people. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be very difficult, because these people, they are doing things that is going to be very, very hard for you to do when you're not under the influence. Like, they think about things these things that you would normally take, like, maybe, let's say, 3 days to come up with, just come to them in an instant. Their mind has been expanded. And within that frame of mind is where ideas come in. Ideas that you might like, very simple ideas. They are just straightforward, very obvious, but you will not think about these things. They will think about these things immediately, and they will implement it. Even when they are off the influence, they know that this particular thought came to them when they were under the influence, and there's a reason why it came to them. It's because they couldn't visualize it when they were sober per se. So they know to prioritize these things. And that is where people get a lot of ideas that they use, that you'll be wondering, how did this person come up with this very simple, obvious idea that I couldn't think of? It's because of drugs. So modafinil is cocaine, a lot of drugs that people use for productivity. These people want to stay awake at night. They don't want to sleep. They want to work and work and work and work. And they use these drugs to keep them awake and sober, so that they can work and work and work, and they're working so that they can surpass you. So you ask yourself, how do I surpass these people? Are you going to use drugs, or are you going to really, if you're not going to use drugs, then you have to be very, very dedicated. You cannot do this thing let's say, you can't half-ass it. You can't say, I'm going to do it today, I'm not going to do it tomorrow, then another day I'm going to do it. You have to do it every single day. You have to practice at it. You have to perfect it. If not, there is no way that you're going to be able to compete with these people, because they are enhancing their biology and you're not. You're allowing yourself to go back and forth, back and forth. The competition just gets ahead of you, and a lot of people don't want to accept it, because some people don't want to, they don't want to say, oh, no, I don't want to use drugs, I don't want to be a drug user. But the fact is that if you're going to compete in the real world, you have to have an edge. So it's either you're very consistent, like someone replied to a tweet I made. It's either you're very consistent at what you do to make sure that you perfect it and get to the topmost level that you can, or you simply use drugs. There are just two options, nowhere else.
I'm so glad you touched this topic, because I've been willing to talk about this topic for a long time. I've had a huge conversation with my friend Lord Psycho about the same topic. That the use of drugs, the use of performance enhancing drugs, it is looked at from a very bad perspective. People say that if someone is using PEDs to enhance their performance in different fields, for example, when it comes to bodybuilding, the use of steroids, when it comes to the top of corporate, so it's the use of such enhancing drugs like modafinil or even psychedelics. So people think very badly of them. This perspective of that people have, that whoever uses PEDs, their performance can be excluded. We should not consider them even in the competition. This is very, very wrong. If someone is using PEDs, you cannot compete on them at any level. And as Papa CM says, that in the top of the hierarchy, use of drugs is not an exception, but it's the rule.
And your morality is stopping you from using these drugs, and you think that you will exclude their performances because, of course, they are using drugs. But the thing is that they get more results than you, and nobody cares about what method someone uses to get results. As far as they're getting results and you are not, they're moving ahead of you. So you're just losing. You're just a sore loser. It just ends up not in your favor. And I don't know why people don't want to. You don't want to accept this simple reality that they're getting ahead of you, and it's paining you because it's hurting you because you're not using drugs. You don't want to use drugs, but whether you use drugs or you don't use drugs, they're still getting ahead of you. They're getting more results. They're making more money. You're just a loser. So whatever your morality is, you just have to consider, what does this way of doing things, what results does it get me? That's just what you need to consider, because the world, it doesn't really care about your morality or your belief system or principles. It's just the results.
Exactly. Again, it's a means of virtue signaling. People are flexing that I don't use drugs, he uses, so I'm better than him. No, the only thing that matters is what you're bringing on the table, and the one who's enhanced, he'll outperform you by a mile. And you'll be crying that okay, I didn't use PEDs, so I should be selected. This is not how world works.
Definitely not.
So, okay, moving on. You just mentioned that there are different dimensions of thinking.
Yes.
I am very interested in this topic of psychedelics. You've researched on this? The psychedelic part? Ayahuasca, LSD?
Well, I actually haven't done LSD because the country that I live in particularly, they are not available. What is available is actually cocaine. And if you wanted to do LSD, you would have to import them. And of course, that is a very long affair. And I have not really bothered to, look into getting some of them.
Yeah.
But I have done a variety of drugs and, of course, drinking and so many different things. And I have compared these things to what you might call virgin thought or natural thought, or how you think when you are sober. And the difference is very clear. I could probably extrapolate how a person would think when he's on LSD, and how a person thinks when he's not on LSD is very obvious, but I could probably extrapolate how a person would think when he's on LSD. You don't think about things Like I'm also making a reference to my friend Anticlimacus, that's AC on Twitter. He said this to me. He said,
Yeah.
psychological thought is not about thinking in one dimension. Like I said before, it's multiple dimensions. What this really means is that you're not thinking about one thing, but you're thinking about A, B, C, D all at once, but not just in like a separate, not just every one of these entities on its own, but how these things connect to each other. You never think about one thing on its own, but you always think about a thing and how it connects to multiple others. Your thought is never about a singular thing. It's always about an interconnection between multiple things. And this was how I came up with this particular idea that synchronicity is proof of duality. Up till today, I haven't been able to like clarify how that thought came to me, but I checked it online. I checked the meaning of these two words, even though I knew these words before. But how that particular thought came to me was always a mystery. So I checked the two words online and I confirmed it that it's true. Synchronicity is proof of duality. Duality is this idea that nature of things is not just one, like multiple things could be related. And then synchronicity is also this idea that something happening in a different place that seems somehow unrelated to another thing happening in another place could somehow be related, even though there is no direct connection to prove it. Like you start thinking about a friend of yours, you haven't spoken to them in a while or anything, and then that friend just calls you. That is what you call synchronicity. You just start thinking about them and then they just call you. So you wonder, how is it that I'm thinking about this person now and this person decides to call me? Is it possible that my thinking about them and them calling me are somehow related? That is why I said synchronicity, which is you thinking about them and them calling you, is proof of duality, which is you and that person are somehow like connected in a dimension that you're not really aware of. And that thought doesn't come to you when you are sober. You don't think about things like that when you are sober. You think about things like that when you are under the influence, when your natural thought processes are inhibited and a different kind of thought process is now released. And that is how you get to a different dimension of thinking from the one that people are usually like the normal one that people are familiar with.
Wow. This is very esoteric and interesting stuff. To think about it, the total light spectrum, okay, the light, it's like it goes from gamma waves to long radio waves. So it's a huge spectrum.
Yeah.
And the visible light, the visible spectrum that we can see, it's a tiny bit of it. Okay, so
yes,
we can see a small section of the total light. So there are so many things that are in front of us that we cannot see. And to think about it, what we call of the beings of another dimensions, they can literally be in front of us, but still will be unable to see them. And it is said that while you are under the influence of psychedelics, you tap into this dimension, you get to interact with these beings.
Yes,
it's very interesting stuff to think about.
I have a friend that is very interested in this particular, he calls it spiritual, but he doesn't really want to call it spiritual, but he calls it that because that is the simplest way to convey this particular information to the average person. Indeed. It's more like the vibration of these. There are higher beings, whether you want to accept it or not, there are higher beings. And although I'm not a religious person, I don't have a particular religion that I say, okay, I'm of this religion. I'm not an atheist either because I don't want to be labeled. I'm a human being. That's the only label I have. I'm very sensitive about that. He talks about these vibrations. He says we are of beings of lower vibration and they are beings of higher vibrations, and we cannot experience that higher vibration because it's above the level of our own vibrations as human beings. So for you to tap into that dimension, you have to increase your own vibration, which means that these things that you call spirituals or angels or metaphysical are actually just higher vibrations compared to your own human vibrations. And there are ways for you to tap into these things. And a lot of people will testify this. Deja talks about this on Twitter. He recently talked about how Rick and Morty about the demon possessing thing about Rick and Morty, and that was a very interesting thing he said. I also grew up with a pastor, and of course I wasn't very interested in church or anything, but I always knew that metaphysical things were, they were real. A lot of my friends have told me about different experiences that they have had with the metaphysical, and if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense when you consider it from a different angle, instead of just thinking, oh, it's something I don't understand. It's possible that just like air is a thing, but you can't really see it, but you can feel it. Now, these metaphysicals, they exist, but you have no direct means of experiencing them. And the ways for you to experience them are not really straightforward. So they confuse people. When people get confused, what do? They just give in to the simplest, explanations. They don't exist. Or they are things I can never understand. People don't really put a lot of effort into trying to understand some of these things. Just a little bit higher vibration than you, and you can no longer experience them in the normal human realm. You have to increase your vibration. And that is where a lot of these things come into play. Esoterics. Some people think esoterics are rubbish, but they are really just confused. They don't understand what these things are all about. And of course, you can't really blame them, because talking about spirituality and all these things, it's not the most convincing topic for someone to just, I believe all these things, even though they are not seeing evidence. Everybody wants evidence. Just like the what is your source people online, they're always asking for source. It's just it's the same way that everybody wants to see physical. I want to see physical evidence. The point is that you can't see physical evidence. That is exactly the point, that you cannot see physical evidence, and you have to recondition your way of thinking to understand that the way of experiencing this thing is not in the physical conventional methods that you see. Otherwise, it all doesn't make sense. If you could experience them in the physical form, then what is the point of everything? Like, what's the point of we trying to explain to you that it's not in the physical sense? You understand what I'm saying?
Exactly, because everyone would know it by default.
Everybody would know by default. So if it were that simple, then it wouldn't be a topic for us to even be talking about. We wouldn't be talking about whether you can see a rock or not, whether water was wet. Nobody talks about those things because they are there by default. And the reason why we talk about these things is because you need to pay a little more, you need to give it a little more time, pay more attention, and be a little more careful in how you evaluate these things and how you get yourself into a different realm. But people don't pay attention to these things, and then they just, what is your source? Show me evidence.
When you zoom out, everything starts to make sense. It's all about, looking things from a third perspective. That is what people lack.
Yeah.
Also, the guys who are all into psychedelics and all these kinds of metaphysical stuff, people think that they are weird, they are stupid. No, I think that these guys have tapped into something that we cannot even think about. That is why they are the way they are. And the way your friend describes vibration, I think it can be equated to the concept called consciousness.
Yes.
Is it possible?
Yes, that's exactly.
Higher consciousness being, lower consciousness being.
He talked about that as well. It was an alternative way of explaining the entire metaphysical thing. When you think about these spiritual things in a non-conventional way, it's like the ants think that there's this particular anecdote that it's a very popular anecdote. To the ant.
Mm-hmm.
The ant queen is a very important being. She births more ants for their colony, and they have a community or whatever that they live in. But to us human beings, they are not important. You could literally just kill an entire ant colony and nothing happened. Like, life just goes on like nothing happened at all. Now, we as humans, like someone said, we're just used to being the predators rather than the prey. So when it comes to a point where we are now the ants rather than the humans, because to the higher consciousness, we are the ants. We are the unimportant beings. We are the ones that could be wiped out of existence and nothing happens. So it becomes very weird because we are used to being the predators.
Yeah.
We literally kill almost any animal we want and eat. We eat plants, as in there are very, very few things that predate on humans. I don't think there's even a particular species that, their main source of feeding is human beings. But human beings feed on cows, they feed on so many different things. Goats, sheep, we have so many chickens, we have so many things that we consider, this one is food. This one is food. I want to eat pork, I want to eat this. Yes, you have so many things that you want to eat. Somebody might just sit down and be like, I'm craving chicken. So many different things that we just consider food. The only thing we consider them is food. But there is no single species that considers human beings food. So when it comes to these higher vibrational beings and the possibility that we might not be as important as we think we are arises, it just confuses people because I'm used to being the predator. I was born the predator. I'm used to being that all my life. So how is it possible that I might just be the ants in this case? It confuses people, and it's not something that you don't expect someone to willingly accept that. It's not a really enjoyable thing to accept, or even interesting thing to accept.
Yeah, whenever someone discusses about the possibilities of the presence of higher beings, at the end the only insecurity that troubles people is acceptance. They cannot accept the fact that they are not the supreme being. We have been leading the earth relatively very recently. Again, if we zoom out, we are insignificant beings. We are nothing when it comes to the grand scheme of things. Yet we think that everything is revolving around us.
It's just about a matter of time before people begin to realize all these things. Even the people that call themselves atheists, who refuse to research into whether the metaphysical is actually a thing. A very funny thing that people don't consider is that we as human beings, we don't make any effort to prove our existence to ants. So if human beings don't make any effort to prove their existence to ants, why would you think that a superior being in the metaphysical realm would try to prove their existence to you as a human being when you are like the ant to them? It's just a very ridiculous way of thinking. Like, if they exist, why don't they prove to us that they exist? Do we ever try to prove ourselves to the ants? And people don't think about these things. They are just deluded to a very large degree.
Absolutely. The more we expand on this topic, it becomes pretty much clear that the chances of a presence of a higher being other than humans, it is well over 90%. I'm pretty sure that there is someone watching me right now speaking about them. I've heard all these crazy stories about people's life being changed after consuming ayahuasca. I'm really curious about ayahuasca. It's also said that you don't find Mother Ayahuasca. Ayahuasca finds you instead whenever you need it.
It definitely finds you.
Yeah, exactly. When you need it the most, it will find you. You don't need to find it. And also, everyone who has tried psychedelics in their life, during their trip, they always see a personified version of this higher being. Have you heard about this? That whenever someone consumes ayahuasca, if they describe their trip later, they say that they saw Mother Ayahuasca. They saw a feminine being.
Well, I can't really talk about this particular insight because I don't have any experience on it. I haven't even spoken to anybody who has done it particularly, but I think that it's possible, perhaps based on a person's pre-existing thoughts on what they expect to see.
Yeah.
They see something probably similar, just like dreams. Dreams come from what were already in your mind before. But the entire idea is always the same, that you experience a higher reality than the one that you are used to, but the setting of that reality is sometimes, perhaps, based on what is already in your mind. So I think that is probably it. And of course, the feminine is the most prevalent image in, I'd say, probably 99% of people on earth, including women and men, and even children. I don't think there's any strong imagery of men, particularly in people's minds.
Very true. Very true. So, okay, I guess this is the end of the podcast. We'll leave on the high. Maybe we'll do another episode following this one at some point of time. Thanks for coming here. You will say it. I had the time of my life discussing these concepts with you.
I really appreciate you having me on this podcast. It's really an honor. I look forward to the next one, if there is going to be a next one.
There has to be a next one. There's so much we haven't talked about.
Definitely. Until next time then.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
All right.